Well, welcome to the podcast.
That's
Yeah,
great. That's great. Thank you for inviting me.
episode 1.
It's kind of an honor.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
for those of the listeners and viewers who don't know who you are, Brendan O'Brien, would you like to give us a little bit of your backstory, maybe your superhero origin story, as they would call it?
Well, to answer you straight, no, I wouldn't like it. I hate giving back my backstory. But yeah, I never actually know where to start on these ones. But I ended up in the career, let's say I'm in. I've answered this like 100 times and I never have a good answer. It's like gravity pulled me into nutrition. And I think it's like my third or fourth career, depending on what you call a career. But I'm in it, 15, I don't know, what is it, 15 years maybe? And it's kind of the first time, it's been the first, let's say, section of my life where I actually feel like I'm at home and, I'm in the right place. But it doesn't kind of hit you straight away. It kind of hit me in hindsight. Like, yeah, that's like a lot of I don't know what you'd call it. In hindsight, I'd call it, put different names on it, like uncertainty or even a little bit of anxiety possibly, but it's like, I'm in the wrong place, but I've liked everything I've done in the past, but I was just in the wrong place. And then this was like, I fell into this by gravity and it was like going down a spiral slide, but enjoyably. And then it was like, yeah, this is the slide I'm meant to be on. That's kind of the way I feel about it. And God, I'm coming out the other end of the slide now. And it's it's a funny one. It's like, there's no straight answer to me. It's like multiple influences at the same time brought me into it. And it's kind of the same story for the particular area that I focus on, which is fertility. It's the same story. It's like, why did I get into fertility? It isn't like a one story. It wasn't actually a fertility thing for me initially, personally. It was almost the opposite, actually. There was almost some sort of, it probably sounds a bit odd, but it almost felt like a bit of guilt that it was so easy for us to have kids. And
wow, that's interesting.
And other people, I knew other people that were having trouble. This is before I even thought about ever working in the field. And it was like, gee, it would have killed me, as I listed on my website. It would have actually broke something in me if I couldn't have kids. And when other people told me about their story, I was, oh my God. But then I kind of knew eventually I had a skill set to help. And I was like, I need to do something about this. I started focusing on it. But that isn't even the full story, because I think the thing that got me, my path, if you like, is intrinsically linked to the Weston Price Foundation in America, which is a kind of a nutrition teaching kind of outfit based on one guy's research who's long dead now. But the organization is thriving, and I was part of it in Limerick, where I'm from. And they have a very strong sort of section, if you like, on, well, I should say the research that this guy, Weston Price, did was very heavily accented towards not just like why were people healthy, but how did they keep them healthy through the generations? That was like the question.
And for those that wouldn't know Weston Price, he was a dentist and a nutritionist.
He was a dentist. Yeah, he was a dentist. I suppose a de facto nutritionist, but actually a dentist. He was like the head of the dental association at one point. He was like totally mainstream, which is kind of ironic because like he's long dead now, but the organization is regarded as almost like a fringe in a sense. But yeah, he toured the world. That's a long story. Will I go into it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'd love to hear it.
He toured the world at the time. He had this question in America, like, why he needed a kind of a control group to see how are people that don't have dental problems not having dental problems. And he could not find anyone in America, couldn't find a big enough group in America of people that didn't have dental problems, because everybody has some dental problems. And he was like, God, I need to go somewhere else and find people so I can compare and see what are they doing differently. And so began a sort of I'm not sure, was it like
a root cause?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Root cause analysis.
Yeah, in fact, I go off on a tangent there, but he actually did write a kind of a big tome of a book on root canals, funny enough, the same guy. But he went, himself and his wife toured the world, but he researched it, like where am I going to go? And he picked out several healthy tribes around the world, indigenous cultures, who not only were they healthy, but they were healthy through the generations.
Okay.
And that's an important distinction. And so, in fact, if you hear people talking about like ancestral nutrition nowadays, you'd be forgiven for thinking like that ancestral people were healthy and that indigenous tribes that are still there today are healthy. But that's actually far from the truth. So it turned out that it was hard enough for him to find, even back in the 1920s, it was hard enough to find healthy populations of people that were healthy across the generations. And so he shortlisted them when he did. And he went off on a journey and visited them, not necessarily lived with them, but he spent some time with them and he documented what they were eating and their stories. And one of the big things he did was, in every single place he went, he got somebody there. His funding, if you like, paid for somebody in everywhere he went to send back samples of the food from the different seasons of the year back to his lab in America. And he measured that, and he measured the things like the fat-soluble vitamins and minerals and content of it.
And for those that are interested in which cultures, he went to visit the Maori, he went to visit the Swiss, and I believe the Gaels in Scotland.
That's right.
As well.
The Gaels would be the nearest ones to us. So I think they're in the Outer Hebrides. I couldn't actually list them off, but he went to African tribes, sort of European-based tribes, if you like. I couldn't list them, but there was dozens of them. And so there's kind of 3 or 4 branches to the story, but like one of the things that actually struck me, and still today is probably the most powerful aspect of the story to me, was that he kind of came up with something like, let's say, 10 principles as to why these populations were healthy. And like, they're not surprising in modern research. It's like there was community, there was food, there was living off the land, there was stuff you'd kind of guess. But one of the consistent things was they would pass nutrition and health knowledge down across the generations. Now, we do not have that right now. It's just not there. And you have to get it from books. You don't even really get it from universities. And it's a different world now. So we don't have it, but they had it. But what's interesting is, in as much as they had it from generations and generations, when the modern trade routes opened up, that was the beginning of the end. So it's the same story everywhere. It's like what they call the white man's food, the white sugar and white flour from the white man. They came in there, and the reason for that was because you could store them. It's a simple story. It's not, nobody thought it out and said, we'll do it this way. It's just, you could store that food, brought it in on the boats. And that was the beginning of the dental rot on those cultures. And he just happened to document it at that time. So he had kind of control groups. He had people that had perfect health, perfect dental health. In fact, they went together. You didn't have one without the other. And he had, versus the people, he would literally have, in some cases, brothers. So the book is full of pictures of this, black and white photos. But brothers, one of them who kind of went to the local town as it was opening up to modern trade, ate the local food, which was bread, sugar, the stuff we're used to here now, and went away from the traditional diet. And literally the teeth were falling out of his head. And the other guy who stayed with the tribe and did the work or whatever they used to do, he was fine. So very stark and perfect timing to do something like this. And
so by the same token, then, what you're talking about is not only birth order, you're also talking then about, the opportunity to get the richest nutrients from the land around that ancestral home versus those man-made commodities or those fully refined commodities that were brought into the bigger towns and cities.
Yeah, exactly.
Industrialized.
That's exactly
areas.
it. Yeah. So in fact, the modern organization that's built on his name, their kind of subtitle is like food farming and the healing arts. So it's not just food, it's farming. And it's also like, it kind of modernized into healing arts of today. But some of what he captured was like, how did you keep people healthy when they did get sick back then? How did you keep them healthy? Interestingly, there wasn't chronic disease. It was acute disease. Okay. That was back then. But anyway, so there were so many strands to that story that almost every one of them is fascinating to me. But one of the key things that was fascinating to me was if you accept that people were growing up in this healthy culture, which is no processed foods and stuff, so they're already like in a good place, let's say compared to the Western world at least, they still went out of their way to say, right, you two guys, you two lovebirds, you're probably going to be married the next year or two. You want to get on a special diet. And so in fact, in some cases, they would take scarce food away from the rest of the tribe, let's say. It would be prioritized to the young couples that were going to have babies in the next year or two.
Those special foods you're looking at then, offal and various other...
Offal, egg yolks, in some cases like deeply yellow butter, shellfish, things, some of the stuff. Offal, as you say, covers a lot, but like sheep's brains, we wouldn't really eat that anymore here. Liver, all kinds of like the cuts that we don't tend to like anymore.
We go for the lean cuts.
We go for the lean cuts, yeah.
Cut.
That's the funny thing about it. So so a lot of his research challenges the way we think today. And I found that fascinating. That was one of the first times I realized, that's what drove home to me, that pregnancy, forget about infertility for a minute, not even able to get pregnant, but like pregnancy itself, it creates such a massive demand on the body that you have to be ready for it in advance. You have to mind yourself during it. And we now know you have to mind yourself after it.
Absolutely. So it's not just about the baby, even after birth. It's about the mother then replenishing.
It's about the mother, yeah. Yeah, so that kind of got me thinking. And so with that kind of foundation, I kind of came at the fertility, and I was like, oh, that's a perfect sort of segue. But at the time, I just thought, what happened is I actually got a few clients who had fertility problems, and some of them didn't even come to me for fertility. They just came to me for something else. And then, by the way, I can't get pregnant. And I was like, oh, wow, I would have led with that, And I ended up thinking I need to, so I got some success, and that's what made me think, maybe I could do this more.
And presumably it's got more to do with that privacy issue for couples, or for, in particular, women?
Not wanting to talk about it.
Not wanting, yeah. Or they mention it as they're walking out the door, like men do generally when they're walking out the door from a GP. It's like, oh yeah, by the way.
Yeah.
By the last few seconds of the visit.
Yeah. By the way, I can't keep my wife happy. And come back. Let's talk. Yeah, it's the same thing. I know it's the same thing, but there's something going on there for sure. I'm kind of reluctant to use the word like shame, but I don't know how far wrong I'd be if I used it. It doesn't apply to everyone, but there is a lot of women, those couples, but there's women in general who don't want to talk about it, which I can totally understand, because it's at a psychological level, it's tied. It's not just. It's like so different to I've high cholesterol or I've a pain in my back and I need help. It's like intrinsically tied to your very identity. And so it's like, it's essentially, if you contemplate, if a woman in particular contemplates the idea that they can't have a baby, it's a challenge. It's an existential challenge to their psychology.
Like a kind of inadequacy of sorts, would it be?
Yeah, it's an inadequacy. It's like, am I really a woman? Questions like that come up, which don't make any sense to people unless they've been through it. It's like,
Yeah.
what do you mean you're really a woman? It's like, well, what's my purpose if I can't have a baby? Well, there's thousands of purposes. Yeah, they don't land on someone who wants to have a baby and can't. It becomes the thing. And so it's deeply personal. It's deeply upsetting. And in a lot of cases, there's not even a clear idea that there's a solution to it. And that's where I thought I could kind of bring some clarity. And interestingly, what is it? I mean, it's maybe 10 or 11 years now that I kind of started specializing in it. I've seen the rise of a lot of other practitioners that are specializing in it. And I think that's great. If you asked me 10 years ago, I would have thought, oh, competition. But now I'm like, no, my God, it's just so needed. More the merrier. It's such a satisfying and powerful area to help with. I say satisfying. Like, I know if you were helping people with, I don't know, bowel problems, it's also very satisfying, but it's satisfying in a more sort of I don't know what to call it, like a legacy kind of a way. It's very satisfying, but it's actually, but the flip side of it is I'm really going into the weeds here, but it's like the flip side of it is when it doesn't work, and it doesn't always work, that's hard to deal with now as a practitioner, let alone as the woman or the couple. It's hard to deal with when it doesn't work because it changes the whole shape of your future life. So that's kind of, there's a long answer to your story.
Well, it's good to get into the weeds on it, basically, because I think many people are afraid to touch the subject, even in terms of conversations with friends, and that they just won't bring it up. So they can feel quite isolated, I would think, in a lot of respects.
Go on.
But for you, you're working so closely with those couples that you're working in that real therapeutic partnership space with them. So I can understand the vulnerability that's there.
Yeah.
But that it's important that they feel heard.
Yeah.
Not just as the woman coming on her own or the man coming, but as a couple as well.
Yeah.
And that they can openly express what it means to them to be on this journey.
Yeah. And I actually think the initial contact is where that either happens or they've already done it in their head so that they can make the initial contact. But I actually like once there's a consultation or we talk about it, after that it's easy to talk about. So it's not like a thing that's hard to talk about once you get into it. It's easy once you get into it. It's the getting into it is the hard part, which is kind of exactly the same with like men with erectile dysfunction, say, for example. They don't want to talk about it, but as soon as they do, it's fine. You can talk about it then. And it's actually not the same thing, but there is a sort of an existential sense of like, oh my God, if that doesn't work, who am I anymore? Yes, it's a tough and tough. I call it, I kind of come to refer to infertility as like a club that nobody has to join, but they're in it. I mean, you could say that for, I don't know, cancer or something as well, similar idea, but it's even different for cancer. Like there isn't really a shame associated with cancer. Shame, it mightn't even be the right word. It's still struggle with what the word is, but it's nobody wants to be in the club. And the stories are kind of funny in one sense, but they're sad. Like
the heartbreak, the longing, I suppose, for something.
Yes, yeah. And like you're like, everything's going, most women, I'll just talk about women for a minute. Most women with infertility don't know they have it until they're trying and they know time's running out. I can hardly remember a client who knew they had it, like, and they said, I want to have a baby in 5 years. Can I sort it out now? I can't even remember if that happened to me because you don't find out until you find out. There is some people who know because they have a condition like PCOS or something, you might know there's an issue there. But so it's like you start maybe the first even couple of years, you're like, let's just kind of try and so it's like building a house, takes ages, takes longer than you thought, and you're not really putting too much attention on it. But then one day it hits you like, oh my God, this isn't working and time could run out. That's the crunch moment of like, you gotta do something. No, a lot of people will get help straight away, but they'll get medical help. Very few people will kind of aim for a more kind of holistic sense of how do I get to the root of the problem and why did it even happen? I don't even think those questions are asked by most people.
And if we just hold there for a moment that you can share then, well, what is the difference between, let's say, the medical end of things that people might choose or that natural, the more natural route, shall we say, that they choose?
There's a huge difference between them, but they're not mutually exclusive. I kind of initially thought, I think initially, I don't know if this is true from like most, natural health practitioners or nutritionists, you kind of think like, no, everything can be solved with what I do. There's a kind of an ego involved, I guess, but I did used to think that initially. And I meet people regularly who think that, even on forums. No, that condition can be completely cured by, X diet or whatever. I'm kind of going, yeah, maybe sometimes, but not all the time. You kind of need both. There's things that both sides can't. One side can do something, the other side just can't do. So the difference is...
There are black swans.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I think the infertility itself probably feels like a black swan to people. It's like this totally unexpected event that jumps out of nowhere. Like, oh, you have it? Oh my God. But what's the main difference? I think the main difference, if I take a higher level view for a minute, I think the main difference is mindset. Forget about the tools and, drugs and procedures and whatever. The mindset is such, there's a gulf between the two mindsets. And yes, there are like fertility clinics that have more natural sort of thinking. And initially I kind of thought, oh great, they're moving in the right direction. But like the more you get into it, the more you realize it's like maybe one step of 100 steps they could take. They're just one step into the natural side of the world. And it's like take folic acid or something, or, do a bit of relaxation, or there's nothing wrong with these, but it's like, it's just,
If it were only that simple.
if it were only that simple. Yeah. And so I think the mindset is the big difference. It's like I call the medical mindset a mono mindset. So it's kind of hyper specialized around the idea of drugs, essentially drugs to sort of force ovulation to happen. And then there's surgery, of course. And then there's, of course, the procedures itself, IVF. And so I would say it's a workaround mentality. You're trying to work around the problem. Whereas with nutrition in particular, you're working through the problem. That's kind of a different way of thinking about it. And I particularly think that the foundation, I refer to this concept of the foundation kind of regularly. And I think about it, it's the way I think about it. I think about nutrition as being the foundation. If you take nutrition as a subset of natural healing, well, it's the foundation. It's more than a foundation, but it's definitely the foundation. So, and a lot of people don't even have the foundation. So it's a little bit like,
So when we say foundations as well, for some people, they may recognize that as the modifiable lifestyle factors, or basically self-care,
yeah,
how
self-care.
you nourish
Yeah. So I would,
mind, body, spirit.
so I would, yeah. And where do you want to draw the line? Like with the foundation, like separate them and say, just focus on nutrition alone and say, well, the body won't work without nutrition. You need to have to drive all of the systems, the enzymes, the production process, the working of the cells, that absolutely relies on a spread of nutrients that are harder to get in the modern world. So I would say, I'm going to go out and, I don't know if I'm on a limb by saying this, but I think most people don't have a solid foundation of nutrition in their body. They have an adequate foundation, but it's not solid out. And a lot of things just tend to work better when the foundation is solid. And I tend to think of what you mentioned there, like the other lifestyle factors. I kind of tend to think this is a bit circular, but like you can build on your foundation with them. But the circular part is you kind of have to have some of them in order to build the foundation in the first place. You have to have the right mindset to build the foundation.
Absolutely.
So it's like, it's circular. But so yeah, you're right in that sense. But if you just took it purely from biochemistry point of view, let's say we all need, I don't know, I'll just pick a nutrient off the top of my head. Let's say we all need CoQ10. We all need CoQ10. Some people need more than others.
And CoQ10, as in coenzyme Q10, do you want to explain to any of our listeners what that actually is?
I will. I could have picked any nutrient there. I just kind of picked that one because it's kind of well known in the fertility field. So CoQ10 is, in fact, where the cells of the body produce energy. These things we call the mitochondria. The CoQ10 is an intrinsic factor in there. So it's like
the mitochondria being basically your battery cell.
The battery cell. So
Power
inside all of our cells, we have these little factories that make energy from the food we eat. And they're called mitochondria. And they're kind of amazing things. They're possibly the most amazing thing in biology, in a way. But they produce energy. Each cell could have hundreds or thousands of them. And so the more energy a cell needs, the more mitochondria it will have. And those mitochondria run on a whole suite of nutrients. And the kind of difference with individuals is that they all need the same suite of nutrients. One of those nutrients is CoQ10. But we kind of need different amounts. We need different ratios, if you like. And even more complicated than that, we need different ratios at different times of our life. So like optimizing that mix is kind of the foundation. That's kind of what I do with people. So I try to optimize that mix. And you can get a lot of that mix right by just what I might call basic good advice. And then like to go further than that, you have to sort of get fairly technical with tests and start tweaking things. But I can't remember the point that came up with the CoQ. What was I talking about the CoQ10 originally about? I was making some point about
to do with the number of nutrients that you may need.
Yeah.
So the fundamentals.
Yeah, so getting the foundation, it was about getting the foundation right. So that would be, so like we could get, okay, I was making the difference, I was kind of trying to differentiate between, let's say, the medical system, first of all. I kind of diverted off into food there, but like it's the same kind of thing. That there's a difference between how the medical system approaches. Oh yeah, the point I was making was the medical system has a mono kind of mindset approach. They will look at let's say they look at the ovaries by scanning and say, oh, you're not producing enough eggs, or your egg reserve is low, or the quality is low, or whatever pronouncement they come out with. That's a kind of a common one. So, okay, we'll use Clomid or something to try and, get your body to produce the eggs more. So it's a hormone that drives the system on. And it does work for some people. But the mindset is so different. It's kind of, so from my perspective, it's like, okay, well, there's a reason the ovaries are not producing the eggs. There's a reason. It's probably fixable.
So we want to go upstream, basically.
Exactly. We want to go upstream of the problem. And no, there's a lot of things it could be. But going back to my analogy of the foundation, if you build the foundation, so you put a solid foundation in place of nutrition, you kind of take away a lot of the problems in one go. Even though you might even know exactly what the problem is, if you put a solid foundation in place, it tends to solve things. Not everything, but it tends to solve things. It makes it easier then to figure out what's left to be solved. And I think that's where medicine does come in. So for example, if you have undernourished ovaries and you take a drug to help you ovulate, it mightn't work, but it might. And even if it does, maybe you'll ovulate more eggs. Now, maybe you don't get the egg you want, fair enough, maybe you try again, but you're still drawing on the same nutrient reserves that you've always had. You've never done anything to sort of raise the foundation or the strength of the foundation in your body so that your ovaries have better resources to draw from.
We're looking here about the quality as opposed to the quantity. So you can really end up with that quantity of eggs, but what is the quality of them if you don't have those essential nutrients there?
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it. And so for example, if you don't have enough CoQ10 for your body, and I add in for your body because that's the personalization aspect of it, the same amount of CoQ10 in somebody else's body might be enough, but in your body mightn't be enough. That will cause the mitochondria in your ovary to produce energy less efficiently. And in a sense, that's the bottom problem. That's the bottom line, the baseline problem with almost everything. It's the inefficient production of energy.
And those ovaries are so energy hungry, like the heart is, the brain is, but equally so the ovaries. And especially at the time of coming up to ovulation, you're looking at that demand increases. And when someone is trying to get pregnant, even more so.
Yeah.
If they want to sustain, viable placenta, they need those well-nourished mitochondria.
Exactly, yeah. It's interesting about the ovaries because if you ask somebody what organ in your body uses the most energy, they'd probably say something like your heart or something, because that's constantly beating. So the muscles literally need a lot of energy. But if you take a biopsy of your heart and you take a biopsy of ovaries and you look into the cells, well, per weight, the ovaries have more mitochondria than even the heart. So it's kind of like, that means that from an energy point of view, the body, like the design, if you like, of the body, it kind of sees the ovaries as having an even higher energy priority than the heart, which is kind of amazing. And now there's more mitochondria in the heart because it's bigger, but per weight, there's more in the ovaries. And exactly as you said, so I think the main reason for that is the flexibility of having to wax and wane between the different menstrual cycles in the 1 month. So 2 weeks of rapid production of egg mass in the ovaries in order to ovulate is very different from the following 2 weeks where the ovulation is done and there's something else is taking over. Something else needs the energy after that. So it's got to be able to.
Maybe that's the perfect time to just talk for 1 second. We'll just pull into the pit stop and talk about what a healthy menstrual cycle looks like. So we're looking at the initial phase, as you say, that's when the eggs are being produced. So you're looking at follicular phase. So can we talk people just briefly through just an overview of what happens over the course of? It's not your 28-day textbook. It can vary from woman to woman. It's very individual.
Yeah.
So if we look and we start from menses and we start when the flow starts, so that's the very first day of a woman's cycle.
Yeah.
Through that follicular phase, what happens throughout that time?
I should mention a pet peeve that I have. This is only a funny joke. It's not a funny joke, but it's just a fun peeve. We call day 1 of menses the start of the cycle, but it's actually the end of the cycle.
Yeah.
When you think about it.
Yeah.
I always used to get why did